Okay, so get this right. Imagine, like, your mom's ambition could make or break your career.
Hmm.
Like, even catapult you, I don't know, to the king's side. It
Mm.
sounds crazy, like right out of Game of Thrones or something.
Yeah, yeah.
But this is a true story. The story of Mary Villiers and her son, George,
Okay.
in the court of King James I, no less.
Yeah, it's really fascinating how their story just like pulls back the curtain on
Yeah.
all this ambition and social climbing in Jacobean England,
Yeah.
It wasn't just about titles and land, but like this whole maneuvering within a system where power could shift so easily.
Totally.
Yeah.
And you found us the perfect source to unpack all of this,
I
right?
think so.
An interview with Benjamin Woolley,
Yes.
author of The King's Assassin,
Yes.
and Andy, historical consultant for this new TV series, Mary and George.
That's right.
So we get to really separate the historical fact from the Hollywood embellishment.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a great opportunity to see how, history can inspire drama, but also how much creative license gets taken sometimes.
Right, right.
And speaking of drama, Mary Villiers was, not your typical noblewoman.
Okay.
Woolley describes her as cunning, fiercely ambitious, just determined to elevate her family's status.
She sounds like a force to be reckoned with.
Oh, absolutely.
What kind of tactics are we even talking about?
Yeah, she faced a major hurdle early on when her first husband, George Villiers Sr., died, most likely from the plague, and she was left with massive debts.
Oh, wow.
We're talking astronomical sums for the time.
Really?
Her solution, a strategic marriage
Okay.
to a man in his 80s, and purely for financial gain.
Wow, talk about a gold digger.
Right.
But I guess you had to be resourceful in those days.
Resourceful is putting it mildly. It gets even more intriguing.
Okay.
Because Woolley suggests that she might have even stripped her elderly husband
Oh, no.
of all his movable assets before he passed.
No way.
This woman was not playing around.
Okay, so she has clearly got this drive, this ambition.
Yes.
But why focus so intensely on her son, George? I mean, she had other children, right?
She did, but Woolley highlights a key factor here.
Mm-hmm.
George was her second son.
Right.
And in that era, second sons were basically out of luck when it came to inheritance.
Oh, right.
They had to make their own way,
Yeah.
which makes George's rise to prominence all the more remarkable.
So Mary really saw potential in George, even though he wasn't the heir apparent.
Absolutely.
What was it about him that made her think he could actually climb the social ladder?
Well, according to Woolley, George was blessed with just incredible charisma
Okay.
and striking good looks. I mean, if you've ever seen the Van Dyke portrait of him,
Right.
you'll know what I mean.
Yeah.
He was basically the heartthrob of the Jacobean era.
Okay, so he's got the looks, but good looks can only get you so far.
That's true.
What else did Mary do to cultivate him, into the kind of man who could catch the king's eye?
This is where it gets really interesting. Okay.
Mary recognized the importance of education and image, right?
Mhm.
The court of King James was very influenced by French culture.
Oh, okay.
So she sent George off to France for a period of, shall we say, refinement.
Ooh la la. So was it all about learning fancy manners and like sipping wine with aristocrats?
Well, the historical record is a bit vague on the specifics of his time in France.
Okay.
But this new TV show certainly takes some creative liberties, hinting at a more, shall we say, scandalous side to his education.
You mean the orgies? Come on, spill the tea.
Now, let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Okay, okay.
Woolley makes it clear that there's no evidence to support those particular depictions.
Oh, all right.
However, France at the time was definitely seen as a place of, let's just say, looser morals.
Right.
And a more relaxed attitude towards certain matters.
Okay, so maybe not full-blown orgies, but definitely a chance for George to develop,
Yes.
a certain worldly sophistication that would have served him well back in the English court.
Exactly. And Mary, ever the strategist?
Knew how to leverage that newfound polish.
Yeah.
She saw an opportunity in the shifting dynamics of King James's inner circle.
Okay.
His current favorite, Robert Carr, the Earl of Somerset, was starting to fall out of favor, particularly with Queen Anne.
Wait, the Queen was involved in this power play?
Oh, absolutely.
That's pretty bold.
It was, and it highlights the fact that this wasn't just some petty rivalry.
Mm-hmm.
Anne had political motivations.
Okay.
Somerset represented a faction that threatened her own influence and alliances.
So they needed a new favorite, someone to replace Somerset
Yes.
and tip the scales in their favor.
Precisely.
Enter George Villiers, fresh off his French finishing school.
Exactly. But gaining the king's attention, well, that wasn't going to be easy.
Right.
It required careful planning
Uh-huh.
and, as Woolley describes it, a bit of orchestrated luck.
Okay.
This is where the story takes a turn toward the almost unbelievable
Great.
with the infamous botched banquet at Apthorpe.
Okay. I am hooked. Tell me everything.
All right, picture this. A grand banquet, dignitaries gathered, and George, our dashing young man,
Yeah.
is chosen as a cupbearer, a chance to make a good impression on the king.
Right.
But things go hilariously wrong.
Oh, no. What happened? Did he spill wine on someone important?
Worse, it seems another cupbearer, jealous of George's opportunity,
Oh,
decided to, well, sabotage him, leading to absolute chaos during the banquet.
I can just imagine the scene.
Yeah.
Food flying, people scrambling.
Oh, yeah.
Poor George caught in the middle of it all.
It must have been quite a spectacle, and
Yeah.
yet Woolley argues that this, embarrassing incident may have actually worked in George's favor.
Really? How so?
It brought him directly to the king's attention, albeit in a less than graceful way.
Right.
Sometimes it's better to be memorable than to be perfect, right?
Absolutely. So what did Mary and Queen Anne do to capitalize on this moment of, shall we say, accidental fame? So they had this opening, this chance to, really make George stand out.
Yes.
What happened next?
Yes. Well, Queen Anne, I mean, she was a pretty savvy political player,
Uh-huh.
seized the opportunity.
Okay.
She arranged for George to be knighted by the king,
Wow.
and even more importantly, appointed as a gentleman of the bedchamber.
Wow, that's a huge leap. What
Ah.
did that role even entail?
Being a gentleman of the bedchamber, it wasn't just about fluffing pillows and
Right.
drawing baths.
Okay.
It meant having direct access to the king,
Oh, wow.
part of his most intimate circle. Really a position of, immense power and influence.
Talk about being in the right place at the right time.
Right.
Poor Somerset must have been watching all this unfold
Oh, yeah.
with a mix of, disbelief and fury.
You can bet he was fuming. Woolley describes this growing tension and jealousy between Somerset and George,
Oh.
which kind of culminated in this rather symbolic event during a royal hunt.
Okay, I love symbolic gestures in history.
Yeah.
What went down?
Well, it was customary for the king to blood a chosen individual after a successful hunt. It was a messy tradition,
Uh-huh.
Involving the blood of the slain animal, but it symbolized the king's favor and good fortune.
Yikes.
Yeah.
Not for the squeamish, but I get the symbolism.
Right.
So James chose George for this honor.
He did, and it was very public, a real declaration of his preference.
Yeah.
Sent a clear message to the court.
Yeah.
George Villiers was a force to be reckoned with.
Wow.
Somerset's days as favorite were officially over.
That's cold-blooded, both literally and figuratively.
Yeah.
Okay, so George is now firmly in the king's good graces, but it can't just be about, a well-timed spill at a banquet and some good PR from the queen, right?
Yeah.
What was it about George that truly captivated King James?
That's where we get into the most, intriguing and perhaps controversial aspect of this story.
Okay.
The relationship between James and George.
Yeah.
It went beyond just the typical monarch-courtier dynamic.
Okay, here's where things get juicy.
Right.
The TV series definitely hints at a romantic relationship. What does Woolley say about all that?
Woolley argues that there's actually evidence suggesting a sexual relationship between the two.
Really?
He cites a letter written by George
Mm-hmm.
where he reminisces about sharing a bed with James at Farnham Castle.
Whoa.
It's pretty suggestive, even by today's standards.
Whoa, hold on. Didn't King James, publicly condemn sodomy?
He did.
That seems a bit hypocritical, don't you think?
It does seem contradictory from a modern perspective.
Yeah.
But Woolley cautions us against, imposing our current understanding of sexuality onto the past.
Right.
The concept of homosexuality, as we understand it,
Yeah.
didn't exist in the same way in Jacobean England.
So how do we make sense of their relationship then?
It's complex.
Yeah.
Woolley suggests we kind of focus on the power dynamics at play.
Okay.
James, despite being king, was a deeply vulnerable man shaped by a pretty traumatic childhood.
Right. His father was murdered, his mother executed.
Exactly.
You mentioned earlier he was nourished in fear. That's such a powerful way to put it.
It is.
It makes you wonder how that upbringing might have affected his relationships
Absolutely.
and his ability to trust.
Exactly. And this is where the relationship with George becomes even more interesting.
Okay.
Woolley suggests that James, despite being the king, he was drawn to George's youthful energy, his charm,
Yeah.
and perhaps saw in him a sense of security, affection
Right.
that he really craved.
It's like this strange mix of power, vulnerability, and like this need for connection.
Precisely. And we have to remember,
Yeah.
the king's bedchamber wasn't just a place of rest, right? It was the center of political power.
Right.
Whoever had access to the king, well, regardless of the nature of their relationship,
Yeah.
wielded considerable influence.
So George's rise to prominence, I mean, it wasn't just about personal ambition
Right.
or even love. It was about shaping, the course of history.
And that's where things get really, really interesting. We're starting to see how personal relationships, courtly intrigue,
Yeah.
political maneuvering, all intertwine to shape the fate of a nation.
This has been a wild ride. It's
Yeah.
amazing how this story of a mother and son just opens up this whole world of like historical intrigue and power dynamics.
It's a reminder that history is never just about dates and facts, right?
Right.
It's about people, their relationships,
Yeah.
and the choices they made, choices that often had far-reaching consequences.
Yeah, it really makes you think about how we like view history, Like we have this tendency to slap, modern labels and judgments onto these figures.
Right.
But it's so important to try to understand them within their own context.
Absolutely. What might seem scandalous or, shocking to us today might have been perfectly normal, even expected back then.
Right.
We have to be careful not to, impose our values onto the past.
Just like you said before, focusing on those power dynamics
Yeah.
can be way more illuminating than trying to, categorize their relationship based on like today's definitions.
Exactly. And in this case,
Yeah.
the power dynamics were so complex.
Right.
You have a king who, despite all his authority,
Yeah.
was deeply insecure, vulnerable,
Mm.
and you had this ambitious young man
Right.
who was able to kind of capitalize on that vulnerability to gain power.
It makes you wonder how much of history is shaped by that personal ambition, even when it's disguised as like love or loyalty.
Right.
I mean, were Mary and George really devoted to King James?
Yeah.
Or were they just playing the game, using him to, advance their own agendas?
That's the question, isn't it? And there's no easy answer.
Right.
It's probably a mix of both,
Yeah.
We can see genuine affection in some of their letters and interactions, but,
Yeah.
it's impossible to separate that from their ambition.
It's a reminder that history is never black and white.
Oh, absolutely.
It's full of, shades of gray,
There's so many shades.
with motivations often intertwined and complex.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so fascinating.
Yeah.
It's not just about memorizing dates and names.
Mm-hmm.
It's about understanding the human story, the
Yeah.
choices people made
Yeah.
and the consequences of those choices.
We've gone from this seemingly straightforward story of a mother and son
I know, right?
to uncovering this whole web of like courtly intrigue,
Yeah.
political maneuvering, and the complexities of love and power in this like whole other era.
It's amazing.
And it all kind of circles back to King James himself, right?
It does.
He's often portrayed as this like bumbling, bookish figure,
Right.
but we've seen a different side of him in this deep dive.
We have.
I mean, he was clearly intelligent.
Oh, yeah.
He commissioned the King James Bible, after all.
Exact.
And also deeply flawed,
Yes, very human.
and those vulnerabilities
Yeah.
shaped by his, traumatic upbringing. Well, they made him susceptible to the manipulations of those around him,
They did.
whether they were driven by like genuine affection
Mm-hmm.
or cold, hard ambition.
Right.
It's been such a captivating journey through history,
It has.
like peeling back the layers of this really fascinating period
Yeah.
and revealing the humanity behind these like larger-than-life figures.
That's what it's all about.
And it leaves us with some really thought-provoking questions,
Absolutely.
Like how much of history is driven by this personal ambition,
Right.
even when it's like disguised as something else?
Yeah.
What compromises are we willing to make to achieve our goals?
It's a question for the ages.
These are questions that like resonate not just in the past, but in our lives today.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, as we navigate our own, ambitions and relationships, it's worth considering the lessons we can learn from those who came before us.
Couldn't agree more.
And on that note, I think we'll wrap up this deep dive into the world of Mary and George Villiers and the captivating court of King James I.
It's been a pleasure.
But this is just one story in the, vast tapestry of history.
So many more.
There are countless others waiting to be explored,
Absolutely.
each offering like a unique perspective on the human experience.
I love that.
So be sure to subscribe and join us next time as we take another deep dive into a captivating historical narrative.
I'll be here.
Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning from the past.